Events were on an apocalyptic scale. Seems like the end of the world threatened to drive a person witnessing them to despair, unless he had nerves of steel. A German soldier at the Battle of Kursk. On August 6th of this year, a new offensive began when the Ukrainian army pushed forward into Russian territory in the Kursk Oblast. It's certainly not the first time this particular area has been hotly contested. The largest tank battle ever fought took place in the same area 81 years ago between the Soviet Red Army and the German Wehrmacht. These two facts together directly led to one of the most bizarre moments so far when the Ostankino television tower in Moscow lit up in remembrance of the last Battle of Kursk while the current Battle of Kursk is still ongoing. "We remember the Battle of Kursk," one slogan said. It was not apparently felt necessary to specify which one. The 1943 Battle of Kursk took place under very different circumstances. The two armies had both just come off a Soviet victory at Stalingrad that claimed an estimated 2 million lives. The psychological effect of the Soviet victory was immense, and Hitler was absolutely sure that a victory on the Eastern Front was necessary to remind everyone of the inexorable strength of Germany, allies and enemies alike. Operation Citadel, the German push toward the city of Kursk, was meant to telegraph that strength once again. Although, according to later reports, some of his generals did question the plan. Hitler held firm. In 1932, we attained victory only by stubbornness that sometimes looked like madness, the Führer said. So too, we will achieve it today. Although the plan itself was considered inviolable, the dates were not. It was delayed several times as the army awaited newer and more advanced equipment. And thanks to a little-known spy ring operating out of Switzerland, those delays may have been the final nail in the Third Reich's coffin. The Lucy spy ring was first openly and vociferously discussed when two French journalists broke the story in 1966 in their book, Man Named Lucy. According to the two Pierres, the journalists who wrote the book, the head of this ring was a fervent anti-Nazi with conservative political beliefs named Rudolf Ressler. Now, the Pierre's book was unabashedly pro-Ressler. Other articles and books have not been quite so forgiving of any of the man's possible personal defects, and so positive about Ressler's actual contributions. And to this day, much about the Lucy spy ring remains maddeningly shrouded in the sort of mystery only contained behind the implacable walls of Soviet and Swiss intelligence. But here's the bare bones of what we do know. Rudolf Ressler moved to Lucerne, Switzerland in the mid-1930s as a devout anti-Nazi. He opened a publishing house devoted to anti-Nazi writing and even wrote anti-Nazi pamphlets himself under a pen name. In some manner, Ressler received an insane amount of intelligence directly from the highest echelons of the German military, including at one point the complete plan for Operation Barbarossa. Ressler shared this information with Swiss intelligence and with the Soviets. In the 4 years he collected information, he submitted over 12,000 typed pages of intelligence reports. And at one point, a German general inspecting a seized Soviet position actually found copies of his own battle plans left behind the retreating Soviets. In the words of a British radio operator working for the Soviets named Alexander Foote, Lucy held in his hands the threads that led to 3 high commands of the German forces. The effects of his communications on the strategies of the Red Army and the defeat of the Wehrmacht was incalculable. After the bare bones, though, the Lucy spy ring begins to get more than a little hazy. For one, the source of the information, and some of it was absolutely incredible, has never been identified. The Pierre's research led them to believe that there were 10 well-placed German officers supplying plans from the Wehrmacht Command, also known as the OKW. In their book, they claim that the information was transmitted to Ressler via radio. And in an absolutely brilliant obfuscation, the plans were transmitted directly from the OKW's own transmitters during peak transmission time. Although the Germans could track down rogue radio transmissions, they were never able to identify the messages being sent out, simply because they weren't rogue messages. In 1980, Anthony Reed and David Fisher's book, Operation Lucy, claimed that the whole ring was a subterfuge to disguise the source of the information being sent to the Soviets, which was intelligence decrypted through the Ultra program. According to this theory, the information would be decrypted and then sent on via Alexander Foote, who in this accounting is considered to have been a double agent, in his support of Soviet activities. Although this has mainly been discounted, the intelligence reached Ressler too quickly to account for Bletchley Park's involvement. The theory still holds some sway among the more conspiracy-minded. A third theory involves yet another intelligence agent within the Lucy ring, a Czech military officer in exile named Karel Selachek. Selachek was involved, but whether it was to pass Ressler's information to the Allies or pass Ressler information from Czech officer friends under German command cannot be fully proven. A fourth theory is that Ressler was a means by which the Swiss could send information they uncovered to the Allies without their intelligence sources or methods being compromised. At this point, something must be said about the Swiss position during World War II. Just before the invasion of Poland, the Journal de Genève ran an article which claimed that, although other nations purported to be neutral, this was not actually true. Belgium had only a voluntary neutrality, while Holland was actually classified as independent neutrality. It was only Switzerland itself that had total neutrality. The statement made sense to the Swiss, and that was all that really mattered. But the Swiss knew their position was extremely vulnerable. Maps of Hitler's ultimate ambitions clearly showed Switzerland amongst German possessions, and its position as a neighbor to the Nazi regime was constantly, uncomfortably awkward. In order to retain their freedom, the Swiss could have absolutely no suspicion of anything that might be deemed threatening to Germany within their borders. However, the Swiss also needed an intelligence system that would inform them of any building German threat. It was at this point that a man named Hans Hausemann entered the picture. Hausemann initially developed his own private intelligence network, known as Bureau H, under the guise of a press-cutting agency. It was intended to make up the shortfalls of the minuscule official intelligence apparatus of the Swiss government. And it was to Bureau H that Ressler began delivering his reports. According to the Pierres, it was Hausemann personally that Ressler delivered a report on the 23rd of September 1939, which stated, "The Third Reich will not rebuild Poland. As soon as the conquest has been completed, the aristocracy and the clergy must be exterminated. The people must be kept at a very low standard of living. They will provide cheap slaves. The Jews will be grouped into towns where they will remain easily accessible. The final solution will take some time to be worked out, and must be kept strictly secret. In August 1940, Ressler delivered yet another bombshell message to Haussmann: an invasion of the Soviet Union planned for spring 1941. Just after Christmas, in a marathon number of transmissions, he received the complete plans for Operation Barbarossa. These were also submitted to Bureau. Ressler, however, did not feel that enough priority was being given to the messages he was passing on. And so, through a communist friend, he arranged to submit the invasion plans directly to the Soviets through Soviet spies living in Switzerland. We do know that Lucy's information was received in Moscow and discounted. Stalin was absolutely sure that Hitler would not invade the Soviet Union and open up a war on two fronts. That would be ridiculous. It wasn't just Lucy's intelligence Stalin ignored. Border agents captured people sneaking across and sent Moscow warnings. Recon flights showed an alarming military buildup by the Third Reich. Churchill personally sent messages to the Russian ambassador in London. All to no avail. See how they're trying to scare us by using the Germans, but also frighten the Germans with the boogeyman of the Soviet Union and goad us once again against each other, Stalin pointed out to General Zhukov. But Stalin was wrong. His nation was invaded by his Nazi allies, and the absolute spot-on level of information from the Lucy spy ring was noted. Information from Lucy would now be classified as the highest priority. It would not be ignored again. As the war dragged on, the Soviets began to use Lucy's information to adjust their tactics. Psychological operations could be based on the intelligence, with the first target being the Hungarian Second Army, massed and ready to attack Soviet positions. Hungarians, we know that tomorrow at dawn you will cross the Oskol, but we will not be there to meet you. We shall meet when and where we wish. You will then be sorry you ever came to Russia, boomed a voice over the loudspeakers. It was not the last time the Soviets would taunt the German military in such a way. The idea that their enemies might know all the German battle plans before the German soldiers actually knew anything drove some men to madness. Ressler kept sending information, and when the Wehrmacht delayed pushing into Kursk several times, the Soviets put their army and 300,000 roped-in citizens to work making the oblast into one of the most inhospitable environments possible. Mines, trenches, traps, and dummy airfields were set up to deceive, distract, and destroy. And this time it worked. The Soviets rolled forward and permanently broke the stranglehold of Germany on the Eastern Front. It was a victory that Ressler rightly felt some ownership of. But all was not well in Ressler's Swiss ring. The Germans hadn't been able to locate the traitors on their own side, but they had managed to figure out that the spy ring was located in Switzerland. Something which absolutely challenged the idea of Swiss neutrality and put the nation's continued freedom into jeopardy. The Swiss needed to shut everything down before the eyes of the Fuhrer turned their way, and Hitler's losses in the East were causing a surge in the search for spies. The Swiss responded by rolling up the Soviet spy ring, which had been operating on their territory, and on May 19, 1944, they arrested Ressler. He was kept in prison for his own safety until September 6. The Swiss were worried that the Germans might attempt to kidnap him. A military trial in 1945 found Ressler guilty of reporting to the Soviets, but also admitted that he had rendered great services to Switzerland. It seemed that Ressler's career as a spy had ended. Except it had not. Ressler was arrested again in 1953 for writing a report to the Czechoslovak government using open sources about West Germany and Europe's militaries. His defense, that his publishing house was no longer profitable and he needed to make money, wasn't enough to save him from a prison term, even though the judgment again made mention of the services he had given to the Swiss state. Rudolf Ressler spent the rest of his life as a freelance journalist and died in 1958. The full facts of the Lucy spy ring died with him.